Nuclear energy in New Brunswick was the focus of a recent public meeting in Fredericton, hosted by the NB Media Co-op. It took place at the Social Forum in Wolastokuk, a 2-day event that brought together activists from across the province and beyond. Nuclear energy is a live issue right now in New Brunswick as NB Power goes forward with its controversial plans to build a small modular nuclear reactor at Point Lepreau. New Brunswick is the only province outside of Ontario that operates a nuclear power reactor, the aging Point Lepreau station. At the Social Forum, Gordon Edwards, president and co-founder of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, outlined the history of nuclear energy and spoke about its risks.
The thing about small modular reactors is that all reactors, large or small, have the same problem. They produce this radioactive waste. There's no way you can get around it.
The Passamaquoddy Recognition Group also led a discussion as part of the session. Hugh Akji is chief of the Peskotomuhkati Nation at Scrutiny, a community with members in New Brunswick and Maine. For decades, the community has pushed for official recognition from the Government of Canada.
14,000 years in this territory, according to your rules, your scientists, your archaeologists. That's our footprint.
The First Nation leader opposes nuclear reactors on their territory and has expressed grave concerns about radioactive waste. Stay tuned for the full presentation, brought to you by the NB Media Co-op in partnership with the Cedar Project.
Thank you all for turning out on a Sunday morning to hear a talk about radioactivity. Normally when I give a talk like this, I have some very beautiful photographs that I show with it, but I don't have the equipment, so it'll just be me talking for the first part of this session. The first hour, I'll take about 45 minutes to present, and then we'll have a discussion. But if you want to interrupt at any time, just signal, and that's fine, because interaction is the most important kind of action I think we can do. Later, for the second hour of this joint presentation, we're going to have Chief Hugh Akji from the Passamaquoddy First Nation here, and he says he would prefer, rather than giving a presentation and having interaction, he'd prefer to have a discussion between us that everybody could join in on. That's what we're going to do for the second half of this hour, okay? There's Chief Hugh back there. Hi. Hello, Chief. So I'm going to, how many people think, well, what is radiation? How many people think they know what radiation is? Could you give me a little, yes, sir.
Yes.
Can you tell what is radiation?
What is radiation?
Actually, in the nucleus of certain products like uranium, there is a change over time. There is on an
atomic level.
Atomic level. There is some electron changes of level of energy, and this emits rays. And these rays can penetrate tissues and woods and protections, and they can damage cells.
Very good, very good. Now, what we've heard here is a very illuminated understanding of what we're talking about, which is radioactivity. Now, radiation is not the same thing as radioactivity. I'd like to draw a distinction between them, because we have, for example, these lights are giving off radiation. It's called visible light. Heat gives off, a radiator heat gives off heat rays. And there is a spectrum of it's called an electromagnetic spectrum of radiation. It's got radio waves, television waves, visible light, and then it's got infrared and ultraviolet, which are not visible to our eyes, but which could be visible to certain types of film. And animals can see sometimes in frequencies that we cannot see. That's radiation. Now, most of our experience with radiation of that kind is something that we can control. We can turn it on. We turn the light switch off, the radiation stops, okay? We turn it back on again, there's the radiation again, okay? And that radiation is generally not harmful. It's not biologically harmful. Some radiation may be. For example, infrared, we know that can be very dangerous and give you bad burns and so on. But what we're talking about is, on this workshop, is radioactivity. And that's what we heard described. And that's what I want to make the distinction of. So let's go back to the beginning. Up until about 150 years ago, we had no idea that atoms could give off energy from rocks. The idea that a rock could give off energy of a penetrating sort was completely unknown. And Henri Becquerel was a researcher in Paris, France, and he discovered that in his drawer he had a rock that contained uranium. Uranium was an element that was discovered a couple of 100 years earlier. But he had this rock in his drawer, and in the same drawer he had a photographic plate that was wrapped in black paper that allowed no light in. So he was very surprised because this rock had been in the drawer for weeks, closed, no light coming in. When he took out the photographic plate and developed it, he saw that it had been exposed by the rock. So the rock had somehow managed to illuminate the photographic plate and expose it. And he was astonished because although he was studying other types of materials that glowed in the dark, all those materials that he had studied required light to shine on it first, and then you would see it glow for a while afterwards, but then it would fade away, right? This was something quite different because the energy was coming off of this rock. And if you can't see these emissions, these radioactive emissions, the energy that's being given off. But if you put that rock in a device called a cloud chamber filled with vapor, then you can see the tracks. And it's amazing. This rock is giving off energy like a fountain of energy in all directions, all the time. 7 hours, 7-Eleven. It's just going all the time. And it's going for millions and millions and millions of years. This rock, day and night, has just been giving off this energy constantly. That's radioactivity. And he was the discoverer of radioactivity. So this is quite a new experience. Now, just 3 months earlier, believe it or not, only 3 months earlier, another researcher named Röntgen discovered X-rays. Now, X-rays are quite different. Although they have some similarities. I'll try and explain it. What he was experimenting with was what are called cathode ray tubes. It's where you send electrical charges through an evacuated tube to a target, and you can make, this is where neon signs come from. Neon signs, they glow, but you can turn neon signs on and off, right? Similarly, with X-rays, if you shine the cathode rays, this evacuated glass tube that is glowing, what he discovered that there was a very penetrating form of electromagnetic radiation being given off, which he called X-rays, X for the unknown. He didn't know what those were either. And one of the first photographs that he ever took was of his wife's hand with the wedding ring on it. And you could see the bones because these X-rays were so penetrating that they went right through the soft tissues and were only obscured by the denser bones and so on. And this allowed you, of course, a wonderful tool to allow you to see the bone structures and to detect what might be going wrong. And dentists, of course, use it, and doctors use it, sometimes use it too much. They use CAT scans, which give off a lot of these X-rays, very high doses of X-rays, and so on and so on. So we all know about X-rays. But the thing about X-rays is that they're human-made. I mean, at least these X-rays are. So when you shut off that machine or unplug the machine, they stop. There's no more X-rays. And you plug it in again, it starts again. And when you turn off an X-ray machine, it's perfectly harmless. It's not going to hurt you at all. It's not radioactive waste, for example. Okay, that's very different from the uranium. The uranium rock has no off switch. It never stops. Nobody knows how to turn it off. Nobody knows how to slow it down. Nobody knows how to alter those emissions, which are going on all the time. And even if the uranium is chemically compounded with other things, it enters into a compound, it's still giving off those rays. And the reason why is because they come right from the very nucleus of the atom. The nucleus of the atom, think of an atom as a kind of a miniature solar system and think of the heart of the atom, that's the nucleus. And that's where that energy is coming from. That's why we call it nuclear energy. Nuclear energy comes from the nucleus of the atom. And nobody had any idea that you could tap into this energy. Well, in the case of uranium, it wasn't us tapping in, it was nature leaking it out. So nature was leaking out this energy. And it turns out that we now know, science now knows, that there are only 4 major forces in the universe: gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the 2 nuclear forces, the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force. And these 2 nuclear forces are the strongest forces in the universe. It's ironic that one of the tiniest things you can imagine, the nucleus of an atom, which is much, much smaller than the atom itself, that tiny thing contains the most powerful force in the universe. And of course, that's what led to the atomic bomb. Now, when scientists were puzzled and delighted to study this phenomenon, they wanted to know more about it. And somebody did a calculation. In fact, Sir Ernest Rutherford, who was called the Newton of atomic physics, he did a calculation of how much energy, if you added it up over 1,000 years, how much energy was coming off this uranium atom. And he said, wow, that's enough energy to destroy the Earth. And but he said, but there's no way that you can tap into that energy. There's no way you can control it. There's no trigger to allow it to happen. Therefore, we just have to take what nature gives us, and that's what it gives us. Now, Becquerel quite early on carried a bit of this rock in his pocket, his shirt pocket, in order to show people. And he developed a very nasty burn on his chest, a radiation burn. And this burn was really, really sore and very difficult to heal. So this gave Marie Curie later on, just 2 years after Becquerel discovered the radioactivity of uranium, Marie Curie was a chemist, a brilliant chemist from Poland, and she decided that she was going to investigate as to what was behind this. So she crushed up the rock, tons of it. She bought tons of this rock, and back-breaking labor, she crushed it all up and ground it to a fine powder, and she separated out the uranium. And sure enough, what she discovered is the uranium is, in fact, radioactive, gives off this, but the rock that she crushed up, left behind, is much more radioactive than the uranium. It's 6 times more radioactive. So she said, there must be something else there. And so she went further, and she gradually removed all of the elements that were known to science. And what she was left with was 2 new elements that nobody ever knew existed. One of them she called radium, and the other one she called polonium. Polonium was named after her homeland of Poland. And she discovered that this radium is millions of times more radioactive than uranium. Actually, gram per gram, millions of times more radioactive. It's because uranium disintegrates, getting ahead of myself. She discovered that it's extremely radioactive, and polonium is even more radioactive than radium, even. But she thought, well, you know what? If radium has the power to burn healthy skin, it would also have the ability to burn unhealthy skin. So she thought, we can fight cancer. So the first use of radium was to fight cancer. She figured that if you put radium in proximity to a cancerous tumor, you could burn that tumor and it would shrink it and hopefully at least delay the onset of fatality. Maybe not a cure for cancer, but certainly a treatment for cancer. And so radium, and so the demand for radium grew under the influence of Marie Curie, who separated these elements and won 2 Nobel Prizes as a result of her work. Quite an accomplishment in those days when women were scarcely recognized. In fact, she wasn't, when they were considered her for a Nobel Prize, they didn't even include, they had Becquerel and her husband, Pierre Curie, and it was only Pierre Curie who insisted that she be included. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been even given the recognition she deserved. Anyway, so fast forward now, what is the usefulness of this radioactivity? Well, there's various things that can be done with it. One of them is they found that if you mix it with certain chemicals and paint dials with it, they will glow in the dark forever. They will glow, and the reason they will glow in the dark forever, I say forever, because radium itself has a half-life of 1,200 years. And what does a half-life mean? Well, now we know what's going on. And back in those days, neither Curie nor Becquerel knew what was going on, really. But now we know better. We know that what's happening here is that the uranium atom is what we call unstable. And because it's unstable, the nucleus is unstable, when it explodes or disintegrates, it gives off a kind of a subatomic shrapnel. And it's that shrapnel that damages living tissue and unhealthy tissue as well, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, and also will expose a photographic plate. So they figured, okay, there's two uses for radioactivity. We can use it to fight cancer, and we can use it to illuminate things. It's a kind of an invisible light. And so you can make these dials that glow in the dark. They hired thousands of girls all over the world to work in radium dial painting factories. And these girls were taught to lick the brushes to get a fine point on them because they had to do very fine work to paint these things very accurately. Radium, by the way, was a very expensive commodity. At that time, we're talking here about the 1920s. This is happening in the 1920s. Even earlier, started in the 1910s. And around that time, radium was selling for $120,000 a gram in current dollars. Like that's in dollars of that era. So you can imagine how much that would be today, right? $120,000 a gram. Now people thought mistakenly at that time that because radium in particular, the byproduct of uranium, because radium is so energetic that it probably would be a good tonic. So they put it into candies, they put it into bottled water, they put it into butter. They sold butter that was laced with radium, and they thought that this would be very healthy for people to get this internal energy, which would charge them up like a tonic, right? And so there were all kinds of really foolish applications of this discovery. And it wasn't until the 1920s that these radium dial painters, these young teenage girls, started developing terrible problems. The first one being radium jaw. They found that their teeth started becoming, their jaw bones and their teeth started becoming very damaged, and the dentists could hardly believe it. These are young girls, 14, 15, 16, 17. Their teeth were falling out spontaneously because the bones were damaged by small, tiny amounts of radium. And then they discovered that they had terrible anemia, this rapid anemia, blood disease, which killed many of them. And when they did autopsies, they found that every bone in the girl's body that they autopsied, every bone was radioactive. That they could put any one of these bones on a photographic plate in a dark room overnight, and it would take its own picture because of the radiation from the bones. Now, this is astonishing because the amount of radium in their bodies, the maximum amount of radium in any of these girls' bodies was 18 micrograms. 18 micrograms, that's the largest. Microgram is 1/1,000,000th of a gram. And one of the difficulties was that there's no chemical test in those days that would determine radium chemically. So if they took chemical samples, they would never find that radium was the cause of this illness. But you have to look at the radioactive emissions. So you need to detect the radiation using a radiation counter. And you really had to, what they had to do was they had to ash the bones and then analyze the bones in order to prove that in fact they had radium in the bones, and that was what the real root cause was. So there were a lot of legal battles over this. A couple of years later, beginning in the 30s, around the end of the 20s and beginning of the 30s, many of these women started to develop a bone cancer. And the bone cancer was in different parts of the body. One person would develop bone cancer in the hip, another person bone cancer in the chest, another person bone cancer in the foot. And so it seemed like, well, can one thing be causing all these bone cancers? And the answer is, yeah, it was radium in every case. But different bones are affected simply because of the roll of the dice. It turns out that when these emissions occur in living tissue, it damages the cells, and sometimes the cell is damaged and able to survive. Most of the time it's killed. If it's killed, the body just gets rid of it. But if it's able to survive, it might be able to reproduce, and if it's able to reproduce, then it might develop abnormally. And if it develops abnormally, then you have a cancer. And where that happens in the body is completely a matter of chance, because it just depends on random damage to certain cells. And that random damage will sometimes lead to cancer and sometimes not. So the result is that you can't say that everybody who's exposed to radiation is going to die of cancer, but you can predict how many people are going to die of cancer, and you don't know who those people are until they're detected. So now that's how we learned early on. Now what is really going on here is that when the uranium atom disintegrates, it actually changes into a new element called protactinium. It's not the same as uranium anymore. And then protactinium is also radioactive, and when it disintegrates, it gives off it turns into another new element.
Protactinium, you said. Eh?
Sorry?
Protactinium, you said? What is that?
Protactinium, yeah. It doesn't matter what the name is, but protactinium is the name of an element which Marie Curie did not discover. It's very short-lived, and it quickly changes into something else, and eventually it changes into radium. So every atom of radium actually started off as an atom of uranium. So what's happening is uranium is actually transforming itself, metamorphizing into different elements, and one of those elements is radium. Okay? So every atom of radium started off as an atom of uranium. Now guess what happens when radium disintegrates? It turns into a gas called radon gas. And that's where all the radon gas comes from. When you ever hear about radon gas, you've heard about that as a problem in homes and so on. Every atom of radon gas started off as an atom of uranium. It's a long decay chain. And the decay chain is how these elements transform themselves. So the result is, and then, by the way, when radium disintegrates, it turns into a new element called, radon is a gas, it turns into an element called polonium. And there's 3 isotopes of polonium, polonium-214, polonium-218, and polonium-210. Now, has anybody heard of polonium-210? You have. Thank you. Well, what connection? Polonium-210. Did you hear about it in any particular connection?
It was somebody which was poisoned with that.
Exactly, yes.
By Russia.
A Russian defector named Litvinenko was poisoned with polonium-210 in London, England, by somebody, a Russian agent sent by Putin to murder him because he was critical of Putin's regime. And they poured a little bit of polonium into his tea. And he died a terrible death. It took him 3 weeks to die. The doctors were puzzled. They finally figured out that it was polonium that was killing him. His body had to be buried as radioactive waste because it had that polonium and its precursors in it as well. Polonium turns out to be, according to polonium-210, that's one of the substances that Marie Curie discovered, one of the things she discovered. It also started off as uranium. So these are all byproducts of uranium, you see. And that polonium-210, according to the Los Alamos laboratory is where they tested the atomic bomb, they say that it's 250 billion times more toxic than cyanide. Cyanide is one of the deadliest poisons known in murder mysteries. Cyanide is a rapid killer. You can poison somebody quickly. They'll die without having to wait around too long. Polonium-210 is considered to be 250 billion times more toxic. That means that a little amount of polonium-210, the size of a grain of sugar, will be enough to kill 1,000 people the way Litvinenko died. So it's very, very potent poison. And by the way, you can't get your hands on that stuff unless you're working in a nuclear program of some sort, in particular a nuclear weapons program. So let's fast forward now, because I don't want to take too much time here. But in 1938, around Christmas time, they discovered the trigger for releasing massive amounts of nuclear energy. Instead of just waiting for these things to decay and making use of them as we do, for good or for ill, right? They found a trigger, and the trigger is called the neutron. And the neutron it's a constituent of every atomic nucleus, but they found a way of generating neutrons, of producing neutrons at will. And once they learned how to produce neutrons, they could fire those neutrons at different elements and see what happens to them. And what happens with the neutrons is that because they have no charge, unlike the proton, which has a lot of charge, a positive charge, because it has no charge, it enters into another nucleus very easily. So if you send the proton, if you direct the neutron, excuse me, if you direct the neutron to another atom, that atom will absorb the neutron, and in many cases, it becomes radioactive, when it wasn't before. So this is a way of turning non-radioactive materials into radioactive materials. And that was done for many years. Enrico Fermi in Rome made a whole career out of firing neutrons at different materials and creating new radioactive elements that are not found in nature. And these new radioactive materials, he found that you could turn almost anything into a radioactive variety. For example, I'll give you one example. Strontium, cobalt. Cobalt is a material which is non-radioactive. It's called cobalt 59. 59 refers to the number of building blocks in the nucleus. There are 59 building blocks in the nucleus. If you fire a neutron at it, it turns into cobalt 60. And cobalt 60 turns out to be a very powerful emitter of gamma radiation, even stronger than X-rays. And so by just firing a neutron into cobalt 59, you can make cobalt 60. Similarly, you can make other radioactive materials. Fermi did this, went through the whole gamut of non-radioactive materials and found that you could produce radioactive varieties of almost anything. All right? But in Berlin, in 1938, around Christmas time, the researchers there did something novel. They fired neutrons at uranium. They said, if I fire neutrons at uranium, maybe I'll get an atom heavier than uranium, which doesn't exist. There is no atom heavier than uranium. In the periodic table of elements, uranium is the high point, element number 92. So they were hoping to be able to get an element heavier than uranium. But what they discovered puzzled them because they didn't understand it. And what they had done is they had actually split the uranium atom. And they had to call upon a woman, Lise Meitner, who did not get a Nobel Prize, by the way, although they did. But they called upon a woman, a chemist, Lise Meitner, who explained to them what had actually happened. What they had actually done was, instead of creating an element heavier than uranium, they had split the uranium atom and produced two elements that are lighter than uranium, the broken pieces. These are called fission products. And so this was the discovery that you can split the atom. And what was even more astonishing than that is that when the atom splits with one neutron, it gives off two neutrons. So those two neutrons can go on to split four atoms, or two atoms, and then that gives off four neutrons, and then so on and so on and so on. Now you could do this on a hand calculator yourself. If you multiply 2 by itself 40 times, you get an enormous number. An enormous number. You get so many zeros. You've never seen so many zeros before in your life. And that's what happens when you double 60 times. If you double even 40 times, you get a huge amount. But 60 times, you really get a huge, huge number. Well, that happens. That number of doublings happens in less than a millionth of a second because the neutrons are flying so rapidly. And that's the atomic bomb. That's the atomic bomb. So early on, they learned that it is possible, using this type of uranium, to get a powerful atomic bomb. And that's what led to the Hiroshima bomb, which Canada, by the way, was working on together with the United States and the United Kingdom in a secret meeting in Quebec City in 1943. Prime Minister Mackenzie King signed an agreement with Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt to develop together, the three countries, the atomic bomb, the first atomic bombs. And Canada was important because they had the uranium. And why did they have the uranium? Because they had previously had a radium mine. When the price of radium by this time had dropped from $120,000 a gram to $70,000 a gram. But it was still very lucrative. And they discovered in the Northwest Territories, way up on Great Bear Lake, and just south of the Arctic Circle, they discovered a deposit of rich uranium-bearing ore That uranium-bearing ore was brought down to Port Hope, Ontario, and that's where the radium was being sold during the 1930s. But it was only at the end of the 1930s they discovered that uranium can be used to make a bomb, not radium. So they weren't interested in the radium anymore, they were interested in the uranium. In fact, so many people had been killed by radium at that point that there was no longer any market for radium. Everybody knew it was a killer. But they wanted the uranium for the bomb, and guess what? Radium is a byproduct of uranium. So anywhere you find radium, there's bound to be uranium there. And so what they had down in Port Hope, Ontario, was they had tons and tons and tons of sandy materials left over that were full of uranium that was discarded because they were selling radium. And they said, why don't you reprocess that waste to get the uranium out, and we can use the uranium to build the world's first atomic bomb. So that's how Canada became involved. Now, this is going on a little long, so let me fast forward now to what we're now faced with, okay? What we're faced with now is the fact that nuclear reactors have been built all over the world. There's about 400, less than 500 of them around the world. There's about 100 in the United States. There's about 20 in Canada. And these reactors use uranium, splitting uranium atoms to produce energy. Enormous energy is released when you split the uranium atoms, and you can use that energy to boil a lot of water to get an enormous amount of steam, and that steam can be used to spin the wheels of a turbine and generate electricity, and that's how we get our electricity from nuclear reactors. Now, for the first 30 years of the nuclear age, from 1945 to 1975, nobody was told by the nuclear industry that we have a problem of radioactive waste. Because while the atoms are being split, all of these byproducts, these broken pieces of uranium atoms, they turn out to be, collectively, millions of times more radioactive than uranium itself. So a fuel bundle is about the size of a fireplace log. You can handle it safely before it goes into the reactor because it's only uranium that's in there. And the radiation from uranium is not going to hurt you if you handle it with gloves and handle it for a very short period of time. You know, if you stay there a long time, you live there, then it's going to harm you. But if you just simply handle it briefly, no problem. However, when that same fuel bundle comes out of the reactor, it'll kill any human being within 20 seconds at a distance of 1 meter, unless they're very carefully shielded. So it gives off a blast of gamma radiation that will kill any human being when it comes out of the reactor, because there are hundreds of new radioactive materials that have been created inside the fuel by splitting those uranium atoms. And most of these things are actually broken pieces of uranium atoms. So I have a chart in on my website which lists 211 of these, and that's not a complete chart. And they have names like iodine-131, cesium-137, strontium-90, and they all have different pathways through the environment, and they all have different pathways through the human body. For example, iodine goes to the throat, it goes to the thyroid gland. Normal iodine, now, back up a little. Iodine is a non-radioactive material. Iodine is found in nature, it's not radioactive. Also, strontium is non-radioactive, you find it in soil. Cesium is not radioactive, it's a constituent of soil also. But what the nuclear reactor does is it creates radioactive varieties of these non-radioactive elements. So now all of a sudden we have radioactive varieties of these things. And that causes enormous damage to people. After the Chernobyl accident, cesium-137, radioactive cesium, very unlike the non-radioactive cesium that we have, was spread far and wide. And for 20 years after the Chernobyl accident, sheep farmers in Wales and northern England had to stop selling their sheep for human consumption because of contamination with cesium-137 from that nuclear reactor in Ukraine, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor that exploded and spread radioactive. So this is a problem. When the nuclear enterprise was launched and when billions of dollars were spent to build these reactors, nobody was told that this was a problem, nor that they didn't really have a solution for it. But as soon as they were caught with their pants down, as it were, in other words, they were discovered in the mid-1970s. It was revealed through a number of reports in England, in the United States, and in Ontario, Canada, and elsewhere in the world. It was, hey, the alarm bells went off and said, did you know that we have this problem? These radioactive wastes are going to remain dangerous for more than 10 million years. And what's more, they're so radiotoxic that we don't have enough fresh water in the whole world that would be enough to dilute this waste to safe drinking levels. They have what are called regulated safe drinking levels, okay, for radioactive materials, how much you're allowed to have in a liter of water. Not recommended, but the maximum allowable. And in Ontario, they had a Royal Commission on Electric Power Planning, which I participated in, called the Porter Commission. And they calculated that if you just took one CANDU reactor, such as the one at Point Lepreau, and you took 1 year's worth of spent fuel, that's the used nuclear fuel that comes out of it, how much water would you need just to handle that amount of used fuel if you wanted to, and this is a mental exercise, nobody's going to do this, but mentally, how much water would you need to dissolve all of that material to the point of the maximum level of contamination allowed by law for drinking water? And the answer is Lake Superior. It's about the size of Lake Superior. That's how much water you would need to dilute just 1 year's worth of spent fuel from one CANDU reactor. Now you think about 20 nuclear reactors, and you think about 30 years of operation, you get 600 Lake Superiors. We don't have 600 Lake Superiors, right? So that's the problem. The problem is that we have to keep this stuff that we've created in these nuclear reactors out of the environment of living things for periods of time that dwarf the span of human history. The pyramids of Egypt are only 5,000 years old. That's not nearly long enough. Plutonium, which is one of the things created inside the nuclear reactor, has a half-life. I haven't explained half-life. Half-life, for any radioactive material, the atoms are disintegrating. As they disintegrate, they're changing into other materials, correct? Well, the time it takes for half of those atoms to disintegrate is called the half-life. In the case of plutonium, it's 24,000 years. So whatever amount of plutonium you have today, 24,000 years from now, you'll have half as much. But the other half hasn't disappeared. It's changed into something else. And guess what? It's changed into another radioactive material, which has a 600 million year half-life. So it's very complicated, because these things don't just disappear. And people get the wrong idea sometimes that when something disintegrates, it's simply gone. No, it's not. So what we have is a permanent problem, not only for the human race, but for all living things, really. And we have if we want to be stewards of the environment, or stewards of the planet, this beautiful planet that we have, that's the only planet in the solar system that supports advanced life, at least, then what are we going to do with this stuff? Now, the nuclear industry said, oh, yes, the nuclear waste, right. We didn't mention that because we know what to do with it. And we have the solution. And the solution is we just dig a hole and we put it down deep where it'll never come back to bother people. And so that's the job done, right? And they've been working ever since to try and find a hole deep enough and strong enough to contain this material for more than 10 million years and to prevent it from leaking out. It turns out that we don't really have the knowledge, sufficient knowledge, to be able to guarantee that this is going to be working properly, because nature is a great recycler. It's very good at recycling things. And this waste is not inert. It's not like just any old rock. It's radioactive. And the result is it's causing chemical reactions underground. One of the things that radioactivity does, those radioactive emissions, one of the things they do is they break chemical bonds. That's how they damage living cells. And breaking chemical bonds means you create ions. Ions are electrically charged fragments of broken molecules. Those are called ions. And for this reason, it's called ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation is radiation that creates these electrical broken bonds, right? That creates a lot of chemical reactions going on, which are unpredictable chemical reactions, by the way. And because, you know, who is going to figure all that out? You can't. It's random. These are random breakages. Now, it also gives off heat. In fact, the heat, just from the radioactivity alone, here's an astonishing thing. If you took any reactor in the world that's operating right now today, and you simply shut it down, stop the reaction from occurring, and stop all the flow of cooling water, and just walk away from it, what will happen? It turns out it won't necessarily explode, but it will melt. It'll melt. And why does it melt? It melts because you can't shut off the radioactivity. You can turn off, by stopping the neutrons, you can stop the chain reaction, but you can't turn off the radioactivity. And so the result is that that radioactivity is a form of energy, and energy turns into heat, and heat builds up the temperature. And if you don't cool it, if you don't keep cooling it, that temperature is going to go up to the melting point, which is about 2,800 degrees Celsius, 2,800 degrees Celsius, which is approximately twice the melting point of steel. So at that point, when the fuel, the uranium fuel starts melting, the uranium fuel bundles release all those radioactive materials which are inside that we call radioactive waste, and that's what comes out of the reactor following an accident. You know, when you think about a Chernobyl accident or a Fukushima accident, where did all this radioactive stuff come from? It was always there. It was created inside the reactor. It's just waiting to get out. And normally it doesn't have the opportunity to get out. But if it overheats and melts, then game over. And now it's out, right? And luckily they were able to contain a surprisingly large percentage of the radioactivity at Fukushima. And so the amount that escaped is just a fraction of what's there. And, you know, I don't know if you know this, but for 20 years after, well, for 10 years at least, after the Fukushima meltdown, triple meltdown, they had to pump about 400 tons of water every day down into the molten core of the reactor underground and pump that water back up to the surface. And when it came back to the surface, it was extremely radioactive. And so they built tanks. They built 1,500 tanks, each one containing 300 tons of contaminated water. And they had to do that. Why? Because the heat is still being generated by the radioactivity. You have to keep cooling it. Even under normal circumstances, when you take the fuel out of a nuclear reactor, you have to put it in a pool of circulating water for at least 5, 6, 7 years. In Canada, it's 10 years usually. And then you can take it out and put it in dry storage, but it's still being cooled by the air circulation. And you can't put it underground until it's at least 30 years old because too much heat is being generated. It will heat up. Once you seal the underground cavity, that heat builds up and there's nowhere for it to go. And so it actually heats up the rocks. It takes, according to Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, it takes about 50,000 years for the underground rocks to return to the normal temperature after you bury this radioactive waste. So you can see that there's a problem there. Now, I'm not going to go on very much longer. I'm just going to say that what does this mean for New Brunswick? Well, what it means for New Brunswick is that the age of nuclear waste is just beginning. The age of nuclear waste is going to stretch out before us longer than we can imagine, way longer than we expect human civilization even to survive, you know. And so we have created a problem of enormous proportions, and we want to do the best thing possible for that. It's going to cost a lot of money, it's going to take a lot of ingenuity, and it's going to take a certain amount of humility. You can't go into this in a boastful fashion and think that you're able to solve this problem lickety-split. And for this reason, I also forgot to mention that while the reactor is operating, it's giving off a lot of neutrons. They're flying all over the place. These neutrons are hitting non-radioactive materials in the concrete and the steel and the building materials around the core of the reactor. So even when you take the irradiated fuel out with all those broken bits of uranium atoms in them, you still have radioactive structures left behind. That's called decommissioning. You have to dismantle that radioactive structure. I just read a report from 1986 saying that they hope to be able, for the most radioactive portions of the structure, they're hoping to be able to flood the structure with water and send divers in with underwater cutting torches, underwater plasma cutting torches, to use the same kind of techniques they use on sunken vessels to be able to salvage. And the water will help to protect the workers from radiation exposure, while also it will also trap a lot of the dust that would be released by cutting. Otherwise it'll go into the air, right? And so they're working away on this. It's not as if they're not working away on this. It's not as if they're not well-intentioned. But the question is, do they really have the answer? They have ideas, they have technology. Some of them are quite brilliant, not necessarily reliable. So we've had already 3 failures of underground repositories, and this has humbled some people, not all. In Germany, they put much lower level radioactive waste, not the irradiated fuel, not the high level waste, low level radioactive waste, into a deep underground repository called the acid 2 repository. And that was done over a period of decades. And for 10 years, this material, radioactive material, was leaking into the groundwater, contaminating the groundwater underground. And the government was not told about this until it had been going on for about 10 years. When the government learned about it, they decided, after investigating, they decided they had to get that waste out again. They have to send people down and retrieve that waste, bring it back to the surface. They have nowhere else to put it, but they'll figure that out later. But they have to get it out from underground because it's doing too much damage down there. And it's going to cost at least $5 billion. And it's going to be very dangerous, and it's going to take about 30 years to get it back to the surface again. So that is only one of 3 failures we've had in the last 15 years of underground repositories. So people are now beginning, and my organization, final step, my organization is advocating that we not abandon this waste. Because the idea of putting it underground is that they can walk away from it. The idea is we can put it underground, bury it, and then we can just wipe our hands and walk away. And in fact, we have the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission gives a license to abandon. They have a license to operate, a license to build, and they have a license to abandon. Well, when they abandon it, it means that it's no longer our problem. It's somebody else's problem. And we don't believe that that's an ethical or scientifically correct way to proceed. So we're advocating something for, remember, these wastes are only 80 years old. I'm 85 years old. These wastes are about 85 years old. So I'm the same age as these nuclear wastes. They haven't been around for thousands of years. We shouldn't be in a rush to bury them and abandon them. We feel that it should be something called rolling stewardship, where it's an intergenerational problem to look after these wastes and make sure that they're kept out of the environment of living things in the most secure way possible. And that means repackaging things as they go along, fixing leaks. If these things start to leak, we need to have it where we can retrieve the waste, where we can access the waste, monitor the waste, and repair it. Because we do know how to contain it for periods of time, hundreds of years perhaps at a time. But we don't know how to abandon it and just forget it. We don't know how to do that. So we're advocating that until the nuclear age comes to an end, we should not think about abandoning this waste, but think about rolling stewardship. I'll stop there. The next part of this session, for those of you who are able to stay, is going to be a conversation between Chief Hugh Ackergy of the Passamaquoddy First Nation and myself, which you're invited to join in, on what it means specifically for New Brunswick and what it means specifically for Point Lepreau. Thank you very much. Any questions? We have time for some questions here, 10 minutes or so.
I have a question.
Yes.
We have a lot of radon in New Brunswick.
Yes.
People fear that they will try to come and dig for our uranium.
Yes.
The waste coming from uranium.
Yes, I in fact was involved in, there was, you remember, there was a time not so long ago, around the time that they enacted a ban on fracking in New Brunswick, they were also exploring for uranium. And there was not as strong an opposition to that, but there was also opposition to that. The trouble with uranium mining is that, as I told you, uranium is never alone. Uranium has all of its decay products with it. So when you bring uranium to the surface, you're bringing all that other stuff, the radium, the polonium. 85% of the radioactivity is left behind in the waste. Only 15% of the radioactivity is taken away in the form of uranium. So uranium mining leaves the worst of the radioactive materials for the population and for the environment, and takes away only that portion of the radioactivity which they want to use. So that's the problem. Now here in New Brunswick, some progress was made towards at least limiting the digging, the exploring for uranium, keeping it away from cities, keeping it away from wells and so on, that sort of thing. But they didn't declare a moratorium. In British Columbia, they have a moratorium, declared a moratorium on uranium mining, a permanent one. In Quebec, they have been advised to have a moratorium, and they are, in fact, not pursuing uranium exploration in Quebec. They did have a law in Nova Scotia up until last year, or 2 years ago, was it? Yeah. 2 years ago. They had a law against uranium exploration and mining, but now that law has been overturned by a guy who seems to be a Trump fund. He went down for the Trump inauguration, so he's a politician from Nova Scotia. He just flipped that law and threw it out the window. So unfortunately, they had a protective law in Nova Scotia, but not any longer. Here in New Brunswick, yes, if that comes back again, I will be happy to supply whatever information I can for that purpose.
Thank you.
Yes?
How do you feel about this notion that SMRs are going to recycle the so-called waste from Point Lepreau, but yet no discussion on the waste that could in turn?
Yeah. I'm going to sit down for a minute. Hold on. My legs are a little bit weak. Excuse me. Getting old is no fun. Anyway, yeah, well, the thing about small modular reactors is that all reactors, large or small, have the same problem. They produce this radioactive waste. There's no way you can get around it. You can't get energy from uranium without splitting the uranium atoms. That's the way you get it. And when you split the uranium atoms, you create these hundreds of radioactive waste byproducts. And the amount of high-level radioactive waste that is produced is directly proportional to the amount of energy you produce. So if you have, for example, 300 megawatt nuclear reactor running for 10 years, that's going to produce half as much waste as a 600 megawatt reactor running for 10 years. So if you know how long it's running and how much energy it's creating, that gives you a very good indication of how much radioactive waste is being produced. Now, that radioactive waste is, the problem is keeping that radioactive waste out of the environment. That's the problem. Now, they say that some reactors are safer than others. I have no doubt that's true. I know that some are more dangerous than others, so some have to be safer than others. But none of them are truly safe because if you just drop a heavy bomb on one of these things, you spread the stuff far and wide. So the radioactive material, as a matter of fact, a nuclear physicist in Britain called Sir Brian Flowers wrote a Royal Commission report for the British government in 1976. He said that if nuclear power had been developed before World War II and had been widely deployed in Europe before World War II, then large parts of Europe today would be uninhabitable because of World War II. And the reason why is because those reactors would undoubtedly have been targeted as military targets, and when you drop a bomb on these things, you all bets are off. You're going to release that radioactive content inside and spread it around. So that's the problem with all reactors, small or large. And unfortunately, in order to save money, they do away with some of the safety systems that they had previously because they're really expensive. You may have heard about a small modular reactor that's been authorized to be constructed in Ontario. It's called the BWRX-300. It's an American design, and it uses fuel that we would have to buy from out of the country because we can't use natural uranium in that reactor. Well, Ontario Power Generation, they haven't even built the thing. They're just digging the hole, right? But they've already estimated that the cost of that reactor, which is only 300 megawatts, that's half the size of Lepreau, the cost of building that reactor will be around $7.7 billion, $7.7 billion. That makes it just about the most expensive electricity ever built in the world.
Darlington? Or is that Darlington?
Right beside Darlington, right beside Darlington.
And that's one of the major projects that has been authorized?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
BW what?
That's correct. It's a BWR. BWR stands for boiling water reactor. Most of the reactors are not boiling in the world, are not boiling water reactors. They're called pressurized water reactors. The 3 Fukushima reactors that melted down at Fukushima. They were all boiling water reactors. There are more boiling water reactors shut down than operating at the present time. And as my friend Sunil Nijhawan, whom we're going to visit today, in fact, in Nova Scotia, he worked in the nuclear industry for over 20 years as a safety analyst. And he's convinced that this reactor is quite unsafe, that it shouldn't be allowed, shouldn't be built. So it's a problem. It's a problem. The actual cost of nuclear, according to even Wall Street, is much higher than the cost of wind with storage or solar with storage. In fact, the highest cost, I've got a graph on, I could have shown you if I had my PowerPoint here. There's a graph published by Lazard, a Wall Street firm, that shows that the highest cost, estimated cost for wind with solar and the highest estimated cost for solar with solar is far less than the lowest estimated cost for nuclear of any kind. So there's no doubt that it is the cheapest form of electricity available. But nevertheless, there's a lot of people who are convinced that nuclear is the way to go. And here in New Brunswick, you have a government that is likewise convinced of that, and we have to wind it up now. We're going to move on to the second part. Actually, I still have 30 seconds. I got my watch right here. I have it proof positive. Okay, well, I think it's time for people to, if you can't stay for the next session, then I'm very glad that you came to this, and I hope you got something out of it. And we will be having a conversation with Chief Hackergy and myself shortly.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm getting thumbs up, all sorts of things. I'm a little disappointed because I was just told I was part of the first presentation, so I thought I was finished, and I was going to stand up here and do what Gordon did and ask you if you had any questions. Unfortunately, I think you're still going to have to listen to me somewhere along the way, somehow, sometime. Meanwhile, I thought, I'm really good at hijacking agendas. Poor Gordon doesn't even know this. But have you noticed there are a couple of empty seats at the front of the room here? Yeah. And I was told that I could probably drag up a guy by the name of Peskotomuhkati. I always have. And since I have to stand here and ask if it's okay to stand and speak in the territory of the Wolastokuk people, I was told I could invite the Grand Chief to sit beside me. I would be honored, especially since I'm wearing the clothes off his back. This shirt was a special gift the other day from Grand Chief Ron. And he still hasn't said I can speak, so I'm supposed to shut up until he says, I see you.
Let me, oh, yeah.
You talk a little louder, please.
Yes, he's a slow speaker, I'm a low speaker. Sorry, did I make him on the room? Okay, good, got away with that one. I'm just going to say welcome. So tickling, wait a minute. I am incomplete. Come on, please. I almost got away with that.
Slow turtle.
Bingo. So we're tricking you. The government will do it, but I'm going to tell you what I'm up to. So you're now part of a circle. Have a look. And we're going to keep this circle moving. Gordon already exposed what I usually do, and that is I need to involve every voice in the room. Remember what we've always heard about how many people have been involved in the recent discussions about residential schools. We're talking about the voices that are missing. Now we've got to start putting them back. We have a good start. I come to hear Gordon. I don't have to come to hear me. And poor Louis, I feel for you. My wife is here, by the way, if anybody would like to know. I have this lovely lady that is part of my life, and I don't know why she's in a room, because She's my sounding board. We have so much that resonates so that I can use these words. But I'm going to give you one quick rundown of what's happening, how I think this, I'd like to see this happen, because I don't sit down and plan this. This is not the way I work. And if you could have seen me, 4 o'clock in the morning, something wakes me up and says, here's what you've got to do. So I've got 3 or 4 pages of notes here. Let's start at 4 o'clock in the morning. I know someone else was there. I woke up at 3:59, so it wasn't quite 4. I do not know who has that schedule. I do not know who shakes me and wakes me. But I do know that at 4 o'clock in the morning, this world is gone. The things that are filling our heads and keeping us busy so we don't hear the real messages, they're packing us with monitors, voices, propaganda, and it comes from where? Governments, it comes from all over. So this is our opportunity. I know we're like-minded people. I know we think alike. I know what they're going to tell you when you go back out into their world and you're going to take this knowledge. But I want to hear from you. So it's your chance, your opportunity. This is actually your forum. These are leaders. These are real leaders. The native content you see in front of you, nobody has to pay for it. I don't know if you know what that means. The people who pay for the chiefs that are responsible for accepting nuclear, for saying there's no problem, for accepting jobs, bonuses, kickbacks, whatever you want to call it. They're usually elected and promoted by governments. Their paychecks come from government. Who do you think they represent? The people that they claim they're part of and representing? No. So this is why there's power in this room. But it's only going to be powerful if we understand the world we walk in. And I have relied so heavily upon the organizers of this event, the Gordon Edwards of the world, and then I take advantage of it. And I get to sit with someone on the way through to Ottawa. And when Gordon Edwards agrees to sit for a breakfast, it didn't matter that the restaurant wasn't there. But I get that a lot with people that are my generation. So what a magical time that we sit, because you just saw the technical component of Gordon Edwards. I got to sit with the human component. And this is where I come from. My name is Hugh. I'm a man. I can be the human. But to hear that in others and to put it into native context, because the real native context is where humanity still resides. That's why they're afraid of us. It's in the land that they're destroying. That's why they're afraid of us. Our connection to the land is real. That's why they're afraid of us. So I want to break into that. Don't be afraid of us. Take advantage of us. There's a difference between use and abuse. Use us. We are open books. We're more than happy to share. And as you know, somebody else is too. So I'm ready to go. We could start with all sorts of things. I was thinking maybe I'll read 3 pages from 4 o'clock in the morning. But no, I'm going to save you from that. I've just given you a gift. That's the only one you're probably going to get. But if I start with Gordon, we're finished, because I'm going to sit here and listen all day. So maybe I'm going to cheat and sneak to the guy whose territory we are in so that we can all be respectful. And I'm not going to corner my good friend with making us a presentation that he didn't expect. But he, too, is part of everything we've done. He's part of the Cedar Group. He's been there for me when we fight for the fish, involving fishery. And then on my right is someone who took me into churches and introduced me to the fight that churches are leading when it comes to the native relationship. When they ask you questions like, what is reconciliation? Isn't it amazing they create a question and they ask us what it means? Watch out for those games. Because they've already got the answer, they're going to put it in your head, and when you're finished, it's like, oh, I guess that's what I thought reconciliation was. Sorry, don't kid yourself. If you want a hint, if you want a clue, look in the opposite direction. Okay, I said I was going to sit down for a while. I'm here to listen. I'm looking forward to this, but I need to hear from everybody. So let's get going because we don't have a whole lot of time, and I would love to hear you just kickstart the process and move it around the room. Thank you, sir.
I remember several years ago, Hugh gave me a call and said, I want to invite you to the United Nations in New York City, to the Indigenous Permanent Forum. So I went, thinking, wow, the United Nations. What an awesome concept. What a privilege to go to and to be part of United Nations. What an oxymoron that I found out. And he never told me what to expect. He was an open book. He seen me I just walk around and listen, and I even had his shirt on, something about Wabanaki people and stuff. As I walked in, the security person said, "You can't wear that in here."
Yeah.
I said, "Pardon?" He said, "You can't wear that shirt because you're demonstrating something." I said, "But it's United Nations," and she said, "If you argue with me, you'll never step in this building again." So I'd have to turn my shirt inside out. Mm-hmm. She said, "If we see you in there, you will be kicked out."
Wow.
So I remember going in, and I went back in the bathroom, and I turned it back around again. And I never got kicked out. But just sitting there, and what I experienced and witnessed was so disheartening. Who was really in command there? We had indigenous people from all over the world who some were selected, some were not selected, because you have to write in your proposed issue that you wanted to talk about, and if you were chosen, you got 3 minutes to vent about what's going on back on your homeland. And keep in mind, the majority of these groups were led by grandmothers, indigenous women. And listening to their stories were heartbreaking and were very parallel to what's happening back here. Some a little bit more advanced, some behind what's happening here, but it was very, very, very parallel events happening. And the disturbing thing is the majority of the mines that are going into indigenous homelands and exploiting resources were from Canada. What was shocking to find out, because everybody claims Canada's such an amazing place to live. It's, well, so that was really shocking to hear. And then eventually to find out who was really in command at the United Nations. And who held the largest voice was the World Bank. There. They had unlimited time to respond to anything that was being said, where each indigenous group had only 3 minutes to talk about their issues. And I remember this indigenous man from Australia, and he said, I have 3 minutes to tell you what's going on. He said, we have the elders who, because of the drought, have to wash themselves in these baby wipes. That's their shower. He said, we have no water. It hasn't rained in months there. So anyway, he said, I have 3 minutes to tell you this, while a lot of our elders are dying back home. And then you'll have a company or states coming and talking and telling you that what I'm telling you is not true. And just to let you know, I'm not going to go on, but that we went there for 5 years, and each time we went, we sat on a bus, because we took a bus from either Portland or Bangor all the way to New York City. So Chief, you and I had a lot of time to talk about going there and then coming back. And there was a gentleman we met, I think the first or second year. His name was Tupac. He's from South America or Central America, but I think he lived in California. And he was on the verge of starting an indigenous United Nations, because he knew that what was actually happening there wasn't, they were listening to what we had to say, but they weren't hearing us. There's a difference. So he was ready to create a council and start talking about forming United Nations at the indigenous level, and that we as indigenous people have to have our voices heard, and we can go directly to Geneva rather than go through the state of New York and United Nations through that. And then COVID hit. It shut down everything. And that's the last time, Chief, you and I went, was 2018, I believe. And then we haven't been back, and we kind of lost contact with all the people when we're starting to build this momentum of creating an indigenous United Nations. So my daily routine in the morning and the evening is very, very simple, and it's is that I wake up and I make sure that I give total gratitude to all life and in all levels of life, from the center of the earth to as high as we can see in the universe. And I'm so grateful for every portions and sections of earth, from the center core where our heart is to the surface and all the way up to the universe. And I take my time in voicing and putting forward thoughts of gratitude, and and I ask them to reach out to humanity and teach us again, because we lost along the way this connection of how to be human. We have become really bad stewards of the earth, and all of us, I shouldn't say some of us, all of us in this room know what it is to be good stewards, but it's the people that hold these so-called powers to be at certain levels of government and industries who think what is best for us. So I just wanted to say those things for now, and then I know there's a few more people that need to talk, and who can probably talk longer than I can. Thank you.
Yeah, well, just a couple of quick comments, because Ron's magic continues when he started taking young people with us, 8 young people or more the last 2 years, to the UN to work with this whole scenario, and we're paying dividends from that today. So all of the things that he said, except for the fact that there's somebody who can speak longer, were probably very true. So Peskotomuhkati, well, he can speak longer. But I also remembered that we were here for a reason, and we're on the agenda for a reason, and that reason is we're supposed to have a dialogue. So I'm going to hijack your agenda by going to Peskotomuhkati. Yes, he's not getting out of this. And then I'd like to have a quick dialogue with Gordon, because I told you that this started in such a way that I realize that the times I get to sit or talk to Gordon, they've even put me on a phone to you, and those conversations, I don't think you understand how important they are to me, my people, and what I'm doing. But I often end with, I wish everybody could hear these conversations. And that's when I thought, maybe we can share some of it. So I'll go to Peskotomuhkati, slip to Gordon and I, and then I'll try to get to as many people in the room as I possibly can. I'd love to hear some of yours. And by the way, Indigenous peoples, we work with stories. Tell us your story. So I'm going to turn somebody into the mic man.
I'll just hold it. You want to hold it? You can hold it.
Golly. You probably have an indication by my gestures that I don't want to be here, taking up time. But, if there's ever a possibility where we can have this kind of time together, I would certainly welcome that. But we have a schedule. There's a clock that's ticking. And all I want to say is that we have much more power than we think we have. And those of us who align with that power, that whatever this nightmare and these melodramas that we're having to deal with is overcomable. And I see that every day. So I'm going to turn it back. Thank you.
Excuse me, before you leave the micro, can you tell us more, a little bit about you? Because I don't know you, it's the first time I see you.
We'll talk after. How's that?
I'll ask my question later.
You're jumping the queue, lady. Yes. No, we're an open mic. We're going to get to everybody. Sometimes the best conversations occur outside the room. Don't hesitate. Nothing ends in this room. You corner him, and then your day's finished. But that's the way to get the rest of this story.
He doesn't share the same bathroom.
Well,
That's wrong.
okay, sometimes there's too much information in the room. However, Gordon, I'm going to start by saying you have done something incredible, the way you shared your knowledge. If I could say to this world, I've met the human being, can you please tell me what I mean?
Well, I think we're all human, and that's what we have to recognize. I was very recently, Chief Justice Sotomayor was on television, and she said, you mustn't judge people by their opinions. Everybody has different opinions. We're all human, and there's a human level, and anybody can change their opinions. I left high school thinking nuclear power was great, because I was told it was clean, safe, cheap, and abundant. I said, well, great. Why wouldn't you want it? And it was only when I found out, after graduating from university with a gold medal in mathematics and physics, I found out nobody ever told me there were radioactive wastes. Why didn't they tell me? Why were the politicians who built these things told that, by the way, there's a problem? We don't know what to do with the radioactive waste. They were not told. So it means that this enterprise was launched in dishonestly, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And that dishonesty, as a human, it offends me, and I think I share my information with other people because I think they should. I don't try and tell people what to think or tell them that my opinion is this and you should adopt it. I try to provide information that will help them to form their own opinion. And I feel that when people know that they're not being dealt with in an honest way, they'll respond as I do and as you do. That's basically where I come from. My biggest shock to me was in 1970, hold on now, I'll just make sure I get the 1976. In 1976, India exploded an atomic bomb using a Canadian nuclear reactor that we gave them as a gift. Now, I, as a scientifically trained person, I graduated from the University of Toronto. How come I didn't know that there was a connection between civilian nuclear efforts and military? I was distinctly led to believe that there was no connection. That no, this is not the bomb, this is nuclear, this is for peaceful purposes. And so it was a real shock to realize that on such a fundamental level to be lied to be misinformed. I found that, I figured, well, I was actually set in motion by another person who I heard speak in Montreal. He was a world-famous mathematician who was visiting there, and he spoke out very loudly about how we scientists, he said, we scientists have an obligation to humanity to share our knowledge and demystify science so that they and we together can cope with the problems facing the planet. Because the whole planet is at risk, and a lot of it has to do with science and technology, and a lot of it has to do with is that people don't have the necessary understanding. And so we have an obligation. So he got me going in terms of saying, I felt in my heart that he was right. And that, what did that mean about myself? I said, well, I should be doing that. I should be sharing my knowledge. So we formed a group together called Survival. I published for many years a magazine called Survival Magazine, which was about the survival of the planet, not just humanity, but all living things on the planet. Because we're really jeopardizing the entire planet, not just ourselves. And so that's really what got me on the road. And I've always found in dealing with the Indigenous people I have dealt with in Ontario and Quebec and elsewhere, that they have a deep spiritual connection to the land that we're lacking. I mean, it's such an elementary thing that's so common in Indigenous communities that water is sacred. Yes. And why is it we, educated people, as scientists, why don't we regard water as sacred? We should. So the idea of transcendent values, it's not just all mechanics, and it's a question of the wisdom of being able to understand the importance of all this to nourishing life. So.
Thanks, Gordon. That's just a flavor of the conversations I've been having with this character. And even that last statement, think about it. We are confusing wisdom with intelligence. They throw in the word knowledge to make it sound like they know what they're talking about. So they're going to collect all our knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and when they take it, digitize it, bring it back to us, we don't know what we're looking at. And the connection that Gordon is talking about is quite simple. If I can bring this down to earth for you. 14,000 years in this territory, according to your rules, your scientists, your archaeologists, that's our footprint. That's DNA. That's connection. 400 years. How does that compare? And yet all the history here seems to be around the 400 years. Well, this is where reality has to hit the road. And you're only going to get that when folks start telling you the truth. That was one of my questions here is, at what point, where do you hear what you just heard in this room who is telling you the truth. Ironically, a lot of the people that are lying to you don't know the truth. They believe the lies. But most cases, there's an agenda. So one of the things I thought about last night that is pertinent to all of this, I'm always impressed that when we go out into the world today, or tonight, or whatever we do, and you turn on televisions, and I know I'm old, and I know the program's long gone, but do you remember this character Seinfeld who sent messages around the world by doing a program about nothing? Does anybody ever think of what that really means? Well, I've got news for you. Today we're here talking about everything. And look at the few people that are really listening. So I think there's a lot more to be said on this, but I would like to just quickly go around the room. Does anybody know what our timeline actually is? Yes, she does. Miss Knowledge? How is it, 5 minutes? Oh boy, you guys have 5 minutes. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay, I need your 10 seconds.
Better than the UN.
Ooh. Just quickly, I'm going to enjoy doing this. 10 seconds. Tell us, okay, here's a question I've been putting out to the world. How do we save this planet?
Oh, my goodness. We hope that the Indigenous people can lead us in the right direction.
Thank you.
Open our hearts.
That's not as simple as you make it look.
Continue to fight without despair.
I thought you said you didn't have enough time to give us your words of wisdom. Thank you.
Begin to think that understanding and choosing the right things is not the same thing.
Thank you for that, certainly. Yes, ma'am.
Community and collaboration.
No problem.
We let the people run the system, not entities.
You stay away from government.
I will say take talk like the truth and work together with like humility.
Thank you. I want you beside me.
Action.
I've been hanging around you too long. Hi.
Fight the billionaires and oligarchs.
And you got the tools to do it, mister. Yes, ma'am.
Coming together with action.
Thank you. Come together right now.
Reconnect to the earth.
You're way ahead of us.
Keep talking and be patient and kind.
Why is that so hard for humans?
Actively invite others into the real world that you see at 4 a.m.
Good luck with that one.
Tolérance. Tolérance.
All the? To all the? To Neil.
Compassion and kindness.
That's it. So,
Learn to share.
again, thank you.
Yeah, speak deeply from the truth that Edward was speaking of, deep down value.
This from the man that knows how to build a birch bark canoe.
Learn how we are being influenced and controlled, and use means that are effective to fight I don't want to fight, I want to find a method, use the method that is effective to stop this.
Yeah, and she's got the rest of the program if anybody wants to hear it later.
Make space for us to grieve in community.
Thank you. Come on, Cecilia.
Benefit from the open hearts and minds from our young kids and connect them with wisdom.
Yeah. Her kids are the perfect example.
listen to discover the values that connect us so that we can make connections with others for making a better world.
You get my vote when you run for government? From what you've heard, folks, one last comment.
I agree.
Well, coming back to you, Gordon, because it's our conversation. Bonnie.
To honor the 1725-26 Peace and Friendship Treaties. We'll start with that.
Thank you. Yes, we should have started there. Gordon, the opportunity you provided, having you here in person, what a treat. I'm so grateful that you're in our territory. You're always welcome here, just like all of you. This is what he's just told you. These are our treaties. This is our promise. We're keeping it as we speak. I would love to have this man in my territory. Can we get you out of Montreal? Do you know how... But in all honesty, we need to hear more from you and from others. And I'm going to say, the voices we heard, I'd like to think that you're empowered to take these messages out there and do just what we're trying to do. Let's get it out there. Because everybody thinks that oral history belongs to natives. I'm sorry, folks, but you're now part. I'm not sorry for this. You're part of our oral history. Thomas King, 2003, Massey lecturer, said, I gave you the story. It's yours. The power is in the story and getting it out. So they can't hide anymore. Oops. And I want to give Gordon the last word, because Gordon...
I'd like to emphasize what the chief has just said about oral history. We underestimate our own power. If you were able to influence just two people in your circle of friendship or collegiality, just two people that are so inspired by what you say that they are in turn motivated to influence two other people, you have started a chain reaction. And the power of interpersonal interaction and personal messaging and personal value of communication is enormous. And I often remind people that, apartheid was overthrown without access to media. They didn't have the media on their side. They didn't have the power on their side. They did it through word of mouth and through their actions, because word of mouth is useless without action. And it's a combination of word of mouth and action that is really powerful. The Soviet Union came down despite all odds against it. And that is the kind of change that can be brought about when people got to shake off the feeling of impotence. You are not at all impotent. It's just a question of getting that chain reaction going.
Tout fini.
It's done, but, I'm off the chief.
Where do we go next?
Everywhere. Everywhere.
Valhalla. You got it. Thank you, everyone, by the way. Thank you, everyone.